Shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Bracha Kodash. Double honors to the elders and the apostles of Great Millstone, and peace and blessings to the elect. And today we're going to go into the book of Wisdom of Solomon, the 18th chapter. Nevertheless, thy saints had a very great light, whose voice they heard, whose voice they hearing and not seeing their shape, because they also had not suffered the same things, they counted them happy. So meanwhile, while the Egyptians are suffering, the worst time of their life, Israel was good, right? As it says, they had light. In Goshen, they had light. They were good. And the Egyptians could hear their voices, but they couldn't see them. And so, as it says, because they also had not suffered the same things, Israel wasn't going through these plagues that the Egyptians were going through. Therefore, the Egyptians counted them happy. They said, man, they're lucky. They're blessed. Because what we're going through over here, oh no, they've never experienced something like that before. Verse 2, but for that they did not hurt them now, of whom they had been wronged before, they thanked them. So because Israel didn't, end up, getting revenge on them, whom they had hurt before or they had wronged before, because we came into Egypt as, to dwell there. We were given a place to stay, and then eventually they turned on us, and then they turned us into slaves and mistreated us. So because of this, it says they thanked Israel and besought them pardon for that they had been enemies. Okay, now I'm going to read this here, verse 2 in the GNTD. It says, those enemies could at least be thankful that the people they had wronged were not taking vengeance on them now, and so they begged them to leave. Verse 3, instead thereof thou gavest them a burning pillar of fire, both to be a guide of the unknown journey. This is the chariot that was guiding us, the children of Israel, out of Egypt throughout the wilderness. It says here, thou gavest them a burning pillar of fire, both to be a guide of the unknown journey, and an harmless sun to entertain them honorably, right? So it would give us light that we may see, protect us, guide us, and lead us. For they were worthy to be deprived of light and imprisoned in darkness, who had kept thy sons shut up. Keeping them shut up is like keeping them hostage, by whom the corrupt light of the law was to be given onto the world, or Salaki, the uncorrupt light of the law was to be given to the world. So, for they were worthy to be deprived of light, talking about the Egyptians, and imprisoned in darkness, that plague that they went through, who had kept thy sons shut up, right? Because they had us in captivity under them, thy sons being the Israelites, by whom the uncorrupt light of the law was to be given to the world. So the uncorrupt light of the law of the Most High was to be made known to the world through Israel. Verse 5, and when they had determined to slay the babes of the saints, one child being cast forth and saved. This was when Pharaoh gave the commandment to slay all the male-borns of Israel. One child being cast forth, which was Moses, and saved, to reprove them, thou tookest away the multitude of their children. So this was Moses that was saved to come against Egypt. And so as a result, the Lord took away the multitude of their children and destroyed them altogether in a mighty water. So this was when, during that time of darkness, the night of the Passover, the Egyptians lost their firstborns. And then the Lord finished them off in the water when they came to pursue after us. And then, the Red Sea that was parted after all Israel had crossed, it closed down on the Egyptians. Of that night were our fathers certified afore, that assuredly, knowing unto what oaths they had given credence, they might afterwards be of good cheer. This is talking about the night of the Passover, right? So when it says here, being certified afore, meaning that it was confirmed to us ahead of time, right? Of the night of the Passover, what would happen and what we were supposed to do. that assuredly, so we were assured, knowing unto what oaths they had given credence, right? And those oaths being we basically had knowledge and remembrance of the oaths the Lord had toward us. Therefore, we weren't afraid. It says they might afterwards be of good cheer. So of thy people was accepted both the salvation of the righteous and the destruction of the enemies. And that's what happened, right? Israel was delivered. The the death angel passed over us, but it destroyed our enemies. For wherewith thou didst punish our adversaries, by the same thou didst glorify us, whom thou hadst called. See, so just as the Lord, it was like a dichotomy where Egypt was suffering, but by the same sufferings that they were suffering, we were being glorified because we were gaining the victory through the Lord over them. Verse 9, for the righteous children of good men did sacrifice secretly, and with one consent made a holy law, that the saints should be like partakers of the same good and evil, the fathers now singing out the songs of praise. And this is during the Passover, right? That secret sacrifice was the offering of the Passover. So I'm going to read this verse 9 in the GNTD. And it reads, during all this time, devout people from this righteous nation were secretly offering sacrifices, giving their word to each other that they would keep God's law and share each other's blessings and dangers. Already they were chanting those ancient hymns of praise while the Egyptians were suffering death. Verse 10. But on the other side, there sounded an ill-according cry of the enemies, and a lamentable noise was carried abroad for children that were bewailed, because the ill cry of the enemies being the Egyptians crying out in that night. Why? Because their children were being put to death by the death angel, right? A most lamentable noise was carried abroad for for children that were bewailed. So they were bewailing or mourning their children that had died. The master and the servant were punished after one manner, and like as the king, so suffered the common person. And it tells you that in Exodus, all of them, from the king all the way down to the servant to even the cattle, all their firstborns died. Of the Egyptians. Verse 12. So they all together had innumerable dead with one kind of death. So they all suffered the same kind of plague, which was from the death angel. Neither were the living sufficient to bury them. So that's how much dead they had, that it wasn't even enough people to bury them. For in one moment, the noblest offspring of them was destroyed. So even up unto Pharaoh's firstborn. For whereas they would not believe anything by reason of the enchantments, so because they kept on having their hearts hardened, because whenever Moses and Aaron, or Aaron and Moses would, Moses and Aaron would go in there and speak to Pharaoh, and then they would perform the signs the Lord would show, the enchantments of the Egyptians, they would use that, the magicians, to counter it, right? Or at least to mimic it. And so the people's hearts were hardened and they didn't believe the power of the Lord. But guess what? Upon the destruction of the firstborn, they were very quick to acknowledge this people to be the sons of God. For while all things were in quiet silence, and that night was in the midst of her swift course, so as the night, now is nice and dark, and the night has commenced, thine almighty word leaped down from heaven. Who is the word of the Lord? Yahushai. Go to the book of John, the 1st chapter. It'll tell you that. So he leaped from heaven out of thy royal throne as a fierce man of war into the midst of a land of destruction, right? Coming into Egypt. And brought thine unfeigned commandment as a sharp sword. What was the Lord's commandment? To slay all their firstborn. So Yahushai, being the destroyer, or the almighty word, came down into Egypt, and in the darkness carried out that plague and started to slay all their firstborns. And standing up, filled all things with death. And it touched the heaven, but it stood upon the earth. So this was contained to this region of Egypt where this plague was affecting them. Then suddenly visions of horrible dreams troubled them sore, and terrors came upon them unlooked for. Like we read in the previous chapter, they started to see these apparitions. They started to see these demons. They started to see these monstrous creatures. Suddenly, just horrifying them, scaring them. And as it says, unlooked for. It was unexpected. Verse 18, and one thrown here and another there, half dead, shewing the cause of his death. And I'll read this part in the NLT, Slakia, the GNTD. It says, all over the land they lay half dead, and let it be known why they were dying. So you had some that were, as it says here, they were basically collapsing, right? And you had people being, everywhere, right? It says here, thrown here, another there, half dead. So you had some that were dying. They weren't dead yet, but those that were dying made it clear why this was happening, that this was God's judgment. Verse 19, for the dreams that troubled them did foreshew this, lest they should perish and not know why they were afflicted. So in these scary visions and dreams they had, it was made clear to them in that why this was happening. This was judgment from God Almighty for you being wicked and oppressing his people. Yea, the tasting of death touched the righteous also, and there was a destruction of the multitude in the wilderness, but the wrath endured not long. So yeah, this destruction, the Lord brought destruction upon the Egyptians, but also at some point in time, he also did bring a taste of death upon Israel in the wilderness. But as it says here, but the wrath endured not long. So it didn't last for a long time, the plague the Lord sent amongst Israel. For then the blameless man made haste and stood forth to defend them, and this is talking about Aaron, and bringing the shield of his proper ministry. This is in the book of Numbers, even prayer, and the propitiation of incense, right? The propitiation is like the offering of incense, set himself against the wrath, and so brought the calamity to an end, declaring that he was thy servant. So let's go real quick here. Aaron stops plague. Numbers 16 and 46. Let's go there real quick. Numbers 16 and 46. It says here, and Moses said unto Aaron, take a censer and put fire therein, right? Going into the incense, right? The propitiation that was offered from the altar, and put on incense, and go quickly into the congregation and make an atonement for them. For there is wrath gone out from the Lord, the plague is begun. That was them tasting that death. And Aaron took as Moses commanded, and ran into the midst of the congregation, and behold, the plague was begun among the people. And he put on incense and made an atonement for the people. And he stood between, this is the key part, right? He stood between the dead and the living, and the plague was stayed. Now they that died in the plague were 14,700, beside them that died about the matter of Korah. So going back to Wisdom of Solomon, chapter 18, verse 23, or Salakia, verse 21, for then the blameless man made haste, right? That was Aaron when he ran and stood forth to defend them, the Israelites, bringing the shield of his proper ministry, which was what? Prayer, even prayer, and the propitiation of incense, set himself against the wrath, and so brought the calamity to an end, declaring that he was thy servant. Verse 22, so he overcame the destroyer. So that plague was being brought forth by the destroyer. The Lord sent it, but Yahushua was carrying it out, because he is known as the destroyer. So he overcame the destroyer, not with the strength of body, nor force of arms. So it's not like he was, he physically, held back the destroyer, but with a word subdued him that punished, alleging the oaths and covenants made with the fathers, right? So in basically that's the prayer, that the atonement that he made for them, that subdued, or it basically stopped the plague which was being brought by the destroyer from continuing to slay the Israelites. For when the dead were now fallen down by heaps, one upon another, standing between, he stayed the wrath and parted the way of the living. And that's how you know this is referring to Aaron, because that's what we just read here in Numbers 16 and 46, right? That when he saw that the plague had already begun, he stood between the dead and the living, and the plague was stayed. Verse 24, for in the long garment was the whole world, and in the 4 rows, this is talking about the design of his garment, and in the 4 rows of the stones, once again going into the breastplate. And let me see here. So reading this part, verse 24, I'll read it in the GNTD after I finish reading it here. It says, and the 4 rows, which is 12, because you have 4 rows and was it 3 columns, of the stones was the glory of the fathers graven, because you had the 12 stones in the breastplate that had the names of the 12 tribes on them, and thy majesty upon the diadem of his head, right? That was the mitre that was upon Aaron's head. Unto these the destroyer gave place, and was afraid of them, for it was enough that they only tasted of the wrath. The destroyer here, right, the one bringing this plague upon him, he wasn't afraid of Aaron. When it says afraid, it just means that he stopped. Okay, because then the Lord was like, all right, cool, you could chill. So I'm going to read verse 24 in the GNTD. It says, he wore a long robe decorated with symbols of the universe. In honor of our ancestors, he wore 4 rows of engraved stones on his chest, and your own majesty was represented by the ornament on his turban. And that brings us to the end of the book of Wisdom of Solomon, the 18th chapter. Lord willing, that was edifying to the elect. In closing, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Rakha Kodash. Until next time, Shalom.